Welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Political Revolution in America podcast. Today I will share part 2 of my conversation with Camila Vergara, political theorist and author of Systemic Corruption, Constitutional Ideas for an Anti-Oligarchic Republic. Camila is one of the leading theorists working today on what real structural democratic renewal actually looks like. In part 1, we explored the theoretical backdrop, what she means when she says our democracies aren't merely corrupted by bad actors, but by genuine systemic corruption. In her view, most liberal democracies are built, structurally designed to protect the elites and a spreading international oligarchy. In this half, we get into the details of what spontaneous democratic resistance really looks like and how Chileans took up the cause for authentic democratic renewal. Camila walks us through the ground-level story of Chile's 2019 uprising, how a few cents added to a subway fare and one tone-deaf comment from a government minister advising the people to just wake up an hour earlier to save money lit a fuse that had been smoldering for decades. She describes the students jumping turnstiles in solidarity with their parents, transit stations burning under circumstances that were never fully investigated, curfews meant to prevent dissent, and the first government troops in the streets since Pinochet. If that sounds all too familiar, keep listening. She explains how out of that chaos came something genuinely rare. A network of citizens' assemblies sharing one goal, to write the world's most progressive constitution. This movement came from the ground up, and in her view, even though it was ultimately defeated by a structural push that undermined the popular will of the people, the example set by the Chilean people remains a hugely significant one for all nations suffering from a decline in democratic norms and system corruption. From there we go further back to the Marquis de Condorcet's 1793 Constitution for revolutionary France and his model of interlinked primary assemblies, a vision of direct democracy that never made it into what we now think of as the liberal democratic tradition. We'll discuss why the framers' fear of the tyranny of the majority doesn't actually hold up historically, and why energy cooperatives and neighborhood assemblies might matter more now than at any other time in our history as a nation. That question, how close we are to a tipping point from oligarchy into outright tyranny, and what it would take to organize our way back out, is where Camila believes the United States stands today. And it should interest every American concerned about our future as a democracy. It's a wide-ranging, sometimes sobering, but ultimately hopeful conversation about power, who holds it, and how ordinary people can actually take it back. Here's part 2 of my conversation with Camila Vergara. I begin by asking her how this movement began. Yeah. Who called for the Constitution? How was the convention actually formed?
It was very interesting. So basically, the government decided to increase the metro fare, which was a cents on the dollar, very small, but it added up, right? And the president at that time was a billionaire, the richest, almost the richest person in Chile. And the guy who brought the credit card business to Chile. So this guy who also has accused of corruption, had like around 15% approval rating at the time. Okay, so almost in the margin of error. Okay, so this thing happened, and one of his ministers went out to defend the measure of increasing, the ticket by saying, well, if you want to go on the off-peak moment, you just need to wake up an hour earlier. So basically, a guy who, born in a golden, cradle, was saying to the working classes, well, if you want to pay less, just wake up at 4 a.m. and go to work at that time. So basically, it was very indignified. People were, very struck by it. And the students, so it was very a sign of solidarity from the very beginning. The students, high school students, to whom this increase in the tariff didn't apply because they have a special card, they decided to protest for their families. So they created this slogan, evade the fare as another way to fight. So they would get to, plan in social media and storm some of the biggest subway stations, and they would just evade the fare and invite everyone to do it. And they would do it in alternate days. So the government didn't know what to do. Then they started beating them up, and it was worse because they had like all kinds of videos of like cops pulling girls' hairs, and trying to take them out of the subway, which is a hybrid private-public industry, right? It is not really strictly private, so it is like the state is in between, right? And then after 2 to 3 weeks, this just was a snowballing effect. It escalated. So in order for the students to not storm the subway stations, the government had the brilliant idea of closing them down. So in a Friday afternoon, after a whole week of working, they decided that the most important hubs of the subway stations, they would be closed in order to avoid the evasion of the fare. So basically, working classes came back, going back to their houses, and they had to march back to their houses. So the students were marching, and they just like a natural, march from everywhere, from the center to the periphery, started, and people were on their feet on the ground. And it was really like a crazy, not violent, but really kind of a lot of people outside. And the government saw this. It was so bad that I think they panicked. And one of the things that happened that never was resolved is that immediately there were some sabotage going on in the subway stations. But it was a coordinated sabotage that has never been investigated. So more than 27 stations of the subway were set ablaze at the same time. And you understand that it's all full of metal. So it's not that you can just like put some wood and, burn it down. You need to have access to a special place where all the electricity is and some special acid to break it down. So the rumors are that it was police that did it because they wanted to stop it and call a state of emergency. So this president, who was very unpopular, called a kind of a national, gathering, and he says immediately we need to shut it down. It's going to be curfew. So the first time since the dictatorship, since 1990, the first time that the military was on the street to repress civilians, the first time since the Pinochet dictatorship. It was very traumatic. So it was like, we cannot stop the movement, so we're just going to crush it in a way. And this created not what the government thought, but actually more mobilization. And then we had during the day, so when it's not like dangerous, women with children and millions of people out. And basically it was either he was going to get out in a helicopter out of the White House, or basically he was going to call for what the people were asking, which was a new constitution. So basically all of the protests in the street, they were very fragmented at the beginning. People wanted healthcare, education, pensions, the environment, different demands. And at the end of those 3 and odd weeks, people understood that was the system the problem, that all these demands needed to be gathered and the constitution itself needed to be recreated in a way, redrafted. And then this president was forced to basically create a process out of nothing to write a new constitution. But that process was really highly manicured and limited in a way, and allowed for some grassroots leaders and indigenous leaders to, for the first time, participate in politics. And that was a game changer. But it was very restricted in a way. It was very insulated from popular demands. Anyways, I was part of the advisory committee for the indigenous peoples and grassroots leaders, and we managed to get many of the articles across and being kind of the vehicles for the assemblies to put their demands for a new constitution to be created and to what they wanted in a way. So it was kind of a victory, but at the end, it was sabotage from a social democratic government, a new president that came in. And basically the status quo won, because basically the elites want nothing to change, and they sabotage the process.
In the United States, it's George Washington states in his farewell address that the basis of our political system is the right of the people to make and to alter their constitutions of government. And I've always thought of that as one of the most remarkable sentences in all of our documents, including the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. And I mean, to define a nation as one which delegates the power to create their constitutions to the people, it's it's a remarkable achievement on the part of the framers to admit that this was, in fact, the reason why we fought the War of Independence. We wanted to create our own form of government. We didn't need a king anymore.
Yeah, but they didn't include that in the Constitution.
They didn't include it in the Constitution, but in his farewell address, he had to kind of admit to that this was the basis of our political system here in the United States. Yet, as you alluded to here, the process for calling for a convention has never really been clearly defined. I mean, they had a constituent assembly in Canada. Iceland had a crowdsourced constitutional convention of sorts, and that failed. New Zealand passed a referendum to change its electoral system, I think in 1996, I think it was. So there are some examples you can look to around the world for how we can organize an entire nation to review their constitution and make proposals for changing it. But in the United States, it's a relatively, it's a very obscure idea for most Americans. We don't know, we don't understand that we even have that power. Yet we do. And I really believe that we have that power. We could, and that's one of the things that we're working on here now, is trying to organize people to call for a convention outside of the Article 5 process, of course. This is strictly a popular convention, which we feel is the only way that we're going to be able to make the kind of changes to our political system that will enable us to move forward into the 21st century with any kind of clarity and real security. And yet that process is very vague. There's a scholar here in the United States, George Van Cleve, who wrote a book called Making a New American Constitution. Sanford Levinson has written about this topic extensively, and as have others. But yet there's no coherent process for doing that in the United States that we can really find. So the assembly process, as you pointed to in Chile, was instrumental in leading to that convention. Yet in the end, it got sabotaged. It wasn't successful. Do you look back and think to yourself what we might have done differently in Chile to be successful?
Well, I think it is one of the issues that I think also the scholars that you mentioned and the idea of a popular convention is also stuck in, which is the national convention. The idea that you're going to have a representative space with X amount of people that will decide for all. And this is not really a popular convention. It's just a representative convention of another sort. So in a way, representation or the voting for others is a form of aristocratic, selection. You are selecting others that are better than you to do the work. You are not doing the work. So one precedent that actually is written down in a constitutional form by one of the most brilliant minds ever alive, who was the Marquis of Condorcet, who wrote the 1793 Constitution for Revolutionary France. He basically created a constitutional system in which the people would assemble where they live in what he calls the primary assemblies. And primary assemblies would be connected in a network. And basically, they could create simple propositions that could be prompted into discussion into adjacent assemblies until you get a critical majority. And if that simple proposition is approved by a critical majority of the primary assemblies, then it becomes law or is pushed into Congress or into a new constitution, for example. So in a way, you need the people to be active If we think about only replicating the system that we have, which is electing others to be in a convention and decide, then we are just mimicking the same system that the framers created, but a little bit better because it is closer to the people. But it's really the same system, the same technology, in a way, of the national constitution, which it was really criticized at the beginning of the 20th century by, for example, a Marxist thinker, Rosa Luxemburg, who was really a creative mind. And for her, this national convention was really a bourgeois institution. It was the assembly of the best. Even if they're working class, it doesn't matter. So we need to be able to be political. We are political animals, according to Aristotle. We need to really judge what are the rules that we are going to select to be the rules in common. So if we can get together and make some simple propositions of what we want a right to housing in which every person has a right to a place to live. This is very simple. This is part of something that could be, a consensus, a right to water, to the clean environment, right? To free education of quality, of equality among ethnic groups, equality of religion. All these things we can agree. So it's not that difficult. We can actually agree and vote on things. And the moment that we discuss, we become smarter citizens. And if we, in that way, we create a draft that is organic, that comes from the ground up, then it's really solid and is going to be supported by the majority because you are invested in it. It's different that if you select some person with one political color and then that person supports a text that you didn't even read or didn't understand or you have no attachment to. That will be very flimsy, very weak. In a way, you need to have a different logic of organizing government itself, because if you're going to have a national convention of the people, but then a constitution that looks very similar to the one that we have today, that basically replicates the representative structures without giving any power to the people, then nothing has changed. It's just an oligarchic democracy 2.0 in a way. So we really need to flip the power from the top to the bottom and create institutions that are organic in a way and that people can actually access for people to exercise political power where they reside, where they inhabit, so they can protect their environments, they can decide the rules in common in the place that they live, and actually create solidarity across borders.
We had the No Kings March the other day. Tremendous outpouring by Americans in support of basically getting rid of this kind of authoritarian rule. Yet I don't see them expressing the kinds of things that would make a lasting change to our political system. So I see it as an enormous opportunity lost, where millions of people get together to get out there with their signs and protest and all that, but they're not focused on what I think you and I would agree are the actual systemic issues that need to be confronted. And so I guess the challenge would be to take those movements, indivisible, there's many of them in the United States, and get them focused on drafting resolutions. You feel like this would be the most effective way to go forward to change our constitution, creating statewide assembly movements perhaps, and that sort of thing.
Yes, and the No Kings March and movement, it's really an opposition to the corrupt individual in power in a way. Only if we get rid of this individual and we have a new government, everything will be fine. Part of this, even if people do not agree and they understand that the game is rigged, doesn't matter who is in power, they still basically march only to get rid of the bad apple instead of understanding that the basket is all rotten in a way, and you really need to thread it again, because you need to, if you know anything about organic decay, the moment that you have a little bit of decay in one part of the basket, all of the fruit go bad in a way, and if you preserve the basket, even if with a little bit of bacteria, it will spread faster than ever after that. So in a way, you need to really change the basket. and a no king's protest is not going to change the basket. It's just going to get rid of some apples if they can, and then we replace with other apples that will go rotten very fast, or again, we're rotten from the very beginning. There's, the US, it tends to be very partisan between Democrats and Republicans, and they think that their own presidents are the good ones and the other the bad ones. But the reality is, if we see the system through the lens of systemic corruption, we see that the inequality has been rising nonstop, doesn't matter who is in power, that actually the Democrats have pacted with big business in a manner that is even worse than the Republicans, and basically the same as militarism. Now we have, both parties really get into that business, and it's not relevant who is really president. It's a matter of degree, not of substance in a way. So I think the sooner that people understand that, and that the only way to change the system is from starting from the local, so you can create pockets of liberty and autonomy, that you can actually run your own local government, and you can create all kinds of innovations on the ground, and it's easier because you live there, because you can go to the office, because it's accessible. If you try to change the system from the federal, as Madison would say, it is all breaking apart, and basically it's very difficult for you to have a national movement that will change the system. So it's a no-go for me. It's like, you're not going to change a law at the federal level. You can change it at the level of ordinance or statute at the local level. That is accessible, and you can branch and scale out from there in a way. You need to be able to be political where you live. It needs to be feasible for you, because the power of the people is always the power of numbers. So it's not about selecting the best among us. It's actually for everyone to participate into rebuilding the country from the ground up.
You're in the UK, and I'm familiar with Roger Hallam and the movement there, the Assemble UK movement, where they're calling for these kind of deliberative assemblies to take place. I see that happening here also in the United States, and I'm working to kind of connect those two movements because they are so very much aligned in their goals to create a more democratic society, a more equal society. Even doing that's been difficult. And I know everybody's busy. Roger's been in prison. He's had a lot on his plate to deal with, and I've been really, really anxious to have a conversation with him, because I feel like this has to be, as Thomas Paine said, a global movement. Democracy has to be global. And I understand that, because equality, I guess the fear of the minority, one of them, which is, I think, to a degree legitimate, is that, chaos and the mob, could destroy the rule of law in a heartbeat if they were left uncontrolled, and to do what they wanted to do. So you can't trust the masses out there to govern themselves, But I think we can, and I think we absolutely must. We have to draw on the power of the people to organize and to envision the kind of world that they really want to live in, and to make that a reality. What opportunities do you see here in the United States for people to organize and to actually create a new constitution that will address these deficiencies? And we have to do it, in my view, very, very soon.
First, the issue of the tyranny of the majority. This is something that is in an ideological construct that was spread by the elites, and that has no rooting in history. There's no tyranny of the majority anywhere in the world. And actually, the moments in history in which an actual majority, the working classes, not the vanguard, not a group, that the actual working classes took hold of the rules of power, of actually ruling, they were really conservative, in the sense that they didn't want to, do much of a transformation. They didn't know how, in a way, and they were not violent. They were really kind of appeasing and wanted to change things for the better, in a way. The only times in which the kind of the masses take over is through a vanguard or a small elite of professional activists that then take over and undermine the whole the mass organization, as it happened with the Bolsheviks in Russia, right? Or even during the French Revolution, and the terror was always about an elite doing things that they were speaking for the people, but the people were not really present. So we need to really dispel the tyranny of the majority, because today we have the tyranny of the minority, the oligarchic minority, and they have no limits, and they have been destroying the earth and exploiting the people for centuries. So in a way, I think we really need to flip that and say we need the majority to be empowered, but empowered also within limits. We have learned through, human rights law, international law, post-war, that they are rights for all. The rights are not to pick and choose. Everybody has human rights and therefore need to be respected. So if we have the rule of the majority within constitutional constraints of human rights, not other propositions, but human rights only, then we can start thinking in a bounded manner, not to go against our neighbor or the people that are different, right? Or to impose my own morality on others. We need to have respect for others. And that kind of base will allow for a progress in the sense of, more democratic progress instead of, more decay. And I think in the US, we have a great opportunity with nature. As you know, I collaborate with the CELDF, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, to draft regulation at the local level, at the state level, protecting nature, and to allow to help basically communities to fight back against pollution, data centers, pollution of the rivers, something that is connected to them, to that community. The community gets activated when it is basically pushed to the limit. And when we have those kinds of crises, we have an opportunity to organize. And it's that opportunity that cannot be squandered into going to just to court in a way, because this is like the technical, way of dealing with things that doesn't get you very far, but actually creating alternatives in which we can protect ourselves in a way and fight back against the companies and do really a collective work. And I think that could be done, as I said, in pockets, can be done in like islands of freedom in a sea of oligarchy, if you will, that can be connected. And those organizations must not be connected only within the territory, but it's global. So we have all kinds of communities around the world pushing against extraction and pollution everywhere. So I think we need to find strength in that kind of global connection that starts in the local and needs to remain in the local, and that sinks its roots in indigenous and ancestral knowledge of we humans as part of ecosystems, instead of us humans separated from nature and therefore dominating nature, right? For the Western mind, nature is a form of property. We appropriate nature and create wealth out of it. For indigenous peoples, we are nature. We are guardians of the ecosystems, but we are not there to exploit. There's a different relation with nature that is not instrumental. So I think that can only change when you are collectively educating yourself and kind of trying to dismantle all the liberal scaffolding that is just constraining your imagination in which and how to relate with nature in a different way and politically in different ways.
So local and statewide deliberations in assemblies leading to some form of national assembly, which
well,
then...
you can have resolutions, because even if you have a national assembly, if you have national assembly with a blank check in a way, you do and you decide, then there's no attachment. You need to be able to draft, like same as Luther, that put all the on the church and put it outside. It doesn't need to be complex.
Okay.
It needs to be approved by everyone. And for that, it needs to be simple and to the point. Right. And that can be done. So if you have a draft of like the 10 commandments for nature, for example, that are brought from below, then you have something. You have a document to push that is agreed by everyone. You have a platform that is not only representation, right? Because then they can decide whatever. And even if they decide something that is good, you're not attached to it. But if you have voted, if you have decided on every piece of that motion in a way or proposal, then you are authoring it for real, in a way. That is what to be actually a legislator, that you're creating rules for ourselves. It doesn't need to be imposed on others to be law. It actually needs to be agreed upon by the people that are under that law. So in a way, even if we are at the local level and we apply that to our own locality, we're already being legislators at the ancient way of being legislators. So this is something that transforms, I think, your spirit, your identity. It transforms consumers of politics into citizens, real citizens that can engage in political action and decision making.
We have a deeply entrenched and corrupt elite that is governing this country now. Getting them, I mean, they have nuclear weapons, they have nuclear submarines, they've got all kinds of resources at their disposal. Getting them out of the system, getting their influence under control seems to me it's going to require much more than that. But maybe I'm wrong.
But you cannot do it without the organization on the ground. And this is the thing why it's so difficult, because you need to be able to control the elites and to organize popular power at the same time. And this is kind of the challenge, but I think it is more feasible for us to start organizing at the bottom and then seize the opportunity when it comes to that. And one of the issues is not just, to organize politically, but you need to find an excuse or a way of doing it or a purpose to do it. And you need to hack your own system. So if we think about the United States as a very entrepreneurial, place in which you can have your own business and participate in Wall Street and all these things are open to you, then we should use that in order to strengthen local communities. I am now working on energy communities of residents that can have a renewable energy infrastructure in common and can basically become a cooperative or other, vehicle in which they have a stake in that kind of common infrastructure, and they can actually access money from it and be sustainable and autonomous and reinvest that money into their communities. So you can actually become more autonomous from the state and create a kind of this island of freedom in a way. And from there, you can actually organize more and branch out in a way. But we need that kind of sustenance, if you will, at the local level, because we cannot do it alone. And we cannot just, think that we're going to restrain the most powerful people in the world without numbers to, be backed with, and without money in a way. We need both. We need resources and we need solidarity and hands to do it. So we need to work on that while, you have this crisis and while this is happening. That can give people an outlet, not only to protest against, no kings and this kind of against the bad apple, but actually doing something proactive, something that could be a safe haven when things got actually even worse than they are today. We need to be prepared in a way and be prepared to have a small fort, if you will, of freedom to be able to fight back.
Do you think we have an expiration date? Are we up against a hard deadline here? I mean, things are looking pretty grim.
Yeah, I think so. In the cycle of systemic corruption, the United States has become a decisively oligarchic democracy since the 1970s, getting worse and worse every day. And an oligarchic democracy ends up either in tyranny or on a revolution. And of course, we are at portas of a fascist, neo-fascist regime in which there's already paramilitaries like the ICE agents. We have, people being killed and harassed and all our rights being, trespassed. This is already happening in real time. So we are at the moment of brink in which the oligarchic democracy is becoming a tyranny, devolving into a tyranny. And that tyranny will last as long as it can stand by itself, in a way, by force. And the only way that that tyranny is going to become undone is by either a coup from a breakaway part of the elite, at the part of the elite that are not benefiting directly from him. They will, stage a coup and take over, which will become another oligarchic democracy, or we will have a popular revolution in which this kind of system will become undone and there's a new possibility for a new beginning, as the philosopher Hannah Arendt would put it at the, in the 20th century. We humans have, by birth, are kind of miracles because we have creativity that cannot really be subsumed to our past or our relations. We create things not from nothing, but really it's imagination, and what she called natality is in us. We are new beginnings. So the moment that we have crisis and we have a systemic corruption of the system that we have now, that is an oligarchy and turn into a tyranny, then there is a possibility for that breakage to allow for a new beginning. Of course, it's very difficult, and we are seeing that now with the upcoming elections. Trump already says that he will have, the National Guard or similar in the streets. So we're going to have military in the streets, people not being able to vote. And the probability that that election will take place is very low, according to my own view. So we are approaching the end of kind of this oligarchic experiment and going in a full-blown tyranny that will become a state of emergency for a long while. So we need to be prepared.
Camila, great conversation. Anything else that you want to point out to our listeners before we go?
Well, I think we need to be positive in the sense that many people lament that the state that we are now and would prefer to go back a couple of years and just keep decaying slowly. I think we are in a crisis and we need to make the best of it. And we need to be prompted into action. And people that were dormant before, the same as in Chile, people that didn't vote, were not organized at all, from one day to the next, they became, active citizens. So it can be done. If it happened in Chile, it can happen in the US, it can happen anywhere. The issue is to be prepared to channel that energy in a productive way that could create a new system that is more just and in harmony with nature. So count me in any of these conversations. I'm happy to participate. And I think we need a grand strategy for sure. And we cannot have these independent energies just go to be diluted by, all that what is happening. Yeah. It's very difficult already to keep, our little light on. Yeah. We need to really, turn into fire.
Well said, Camila. And thank you for joining the conversation on the Peaceful Political Revolution in America podcast. We'll be talking soon, I hope. So that's part 2 of my conversation with Camila, and I have to say it's exactly what I was hoping to hear. Camila points out that Chile's uprising didn't start as a constitutional moment. It started over a fight about subway fares, students refusing to accept being told to wake up at 4 a.m. to save a few extra pennies. It only became a fight over the Constitution in Chile once people realized every one of their concerns trace back to the same broken structure. It's a process worth recognizing. Immigration, housing, healthcare, education, our institutions of government are in need of serious democratic reform. But we're fighting all of these battles separately, like we have always done. Camila argues that these issues stem from the same source. Dressed up as a disagreement over policies and politicians on both sides of the political spectrum, the system corruption and democratic failures are in fact all part and parcel of an outdated and undemocratic constitution. I want to circle back to her point about the so-called tyranny of the majority as well, a story the elites keep repeating to keep us divided. But the actual historical records show that working people, when they have been united and when they have held power, have tended to be cautious and constructive. Human beings want to move forward. We don't want to live in the past. Her model of building outward from local energy cooperatives and neighborhood assemblies, rather than waiting for a politician to fix things or for a national constitutional convention, is directly relevant to the work being done right now across the country. Better Angels, Unify USA, Renew American Democracy, Thriving Together, Move to Amend, the Alliance for Democracy, CELDEF, Public Citizen, and many more are all tirelessly working to fix our politics and renew our democratic institutions. My thanks to Camila for her time, her candor, and her incredible insight. It's the kind of knowledge that can liberate us from the illusions we cling to about our political system, our Constitution, and our power as sovereign citizens. When elections are not enough, perhaps citizens' assemblies will be the answer. In the next episode, I will be turning to a different question altogether. Not just whether we need a new constitutional moment, but whether our Constitution was ever meant to last as long as it has. So please join me when I talk with Bo Breslin, Professor of Political Science at Skidmore College, about his book, A Constitution for the Living. This book centers around a debate that has been largely ignored and forgotten by most Americans, an actual exchange between Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, in which Jefferson argued that no generation has the right to bind the next, and that roughly every 19 years, a new generation should be free to write its own constitution, one for their times and for their society. Madison won that argument in 1789, and we've been living under that same system for a very long time. But it seems Americans may be waking up, wondering how could we have a constitution for the living, and what would it look like? Bo imagines what our nation might have become had Jefferson won that debate. Constitutional conventions in 1825, 1863, 1903, and beyond, each one grappling with the real fights of its era: slavery, suffrage, the size and reach of government, the environment. It's a fascinating thought experiment on its own, and after spending this episode with Camila talking about what it actually takes to build a new constitution from the ground up, I think you'll find Bo's historical imagination exactly the kind of inspiration you need. That's next time on The Peaceful Political Revolution. Until then, stay safe out there.